Hello, my name is Dolores, and this is Depression, What's Your Deal? For this week's episode, I wanted to start off with the hardest topic to talk about. So, dive straight into what depression is. Now, depression isn't easy to talk about, but neither is any other mental health issue out there. So, I first want to raise you a question. What does depression mean to you? Now, for those of us who suffer, this is an easy question to answer because we can start associating a million things that come with our depression and how it makes us feel. But on the other side of that, it is harder to really answer that question for the people that love you, that have to watch you go through it, or for your friends, because really we don't know why you're struggling or how to help you out of the struggle. Now, with researching, there's a few things I would like to share with you that I learned myself. About 3 million cases per year are associated with depression. Now, this is not including the ones who have not openly come out or sought help for depression. Here's another thing that I thought was interesting or to think about. About 5 million deaths per year are associated with mood and anxiety disorders. Another thing that I thought was interesting and to think about. About 5 million deaths per year are associated with mood and anxiety disorders. And this percentage is including the people that have gone out to seek treatment. Now, for a lot of you that listen to this, you'll think 2% isn't a lot, but it is for the ones who have lost somebody that they love, that they can no longer speak to, see, or create new memories with at all. So really, the 2% becomes way larger than you think it is. And then again, when you think about it, that's the 2% recorded of the people who were treated for depression. So what about all the people who weren't treated and who gave up their lives from suffering from this illness? This is part of the reason I think we don't openly talk about how we feel and what we're going through with depression. We don't want anybody to know that we're silently suffering, and we don't want them to start to worry about us in any way. For us that suffer, the loneliness is the hardest part because we don't want to feel lonely, and we want to be around our family and friends, but we feel like it's almost safer to not be around them because we don't want them to realize we're not acting normal or to notice that something is wrong and then start asking questions that we feel uncomfortable answering at that moment. For a lot of us, the feelings are not feeling good enough and not feeling loved, which is silly because for most of us who go through this, we have family and friends who deeply care and deeply love us. But with all the mixed emotions we're feeling, it's hard to really think and portray that we feel like we're being loved enough that everything will be okay. Because when you can't lift your head off the pillow in the morning and you don't want to go to work and you don't want to communicate with people and you start to lose interest in the things that you once loved doing, it's almost like a snowball going down the hill. You start off with these little negative things that just snowball into something big, and by the time it's something big, we almost don't know how to talk about it and openly share how we feel. And the overall sadness we feel almost takes over our everyday life, and that's because depression is decreasing our ability to want to function. Depression is different for everybody. We experience it differently. It comes on differently. Now, the symptoms from it are very similar, but how it comes about is different. For some, it's traumas or abuse from childhood or growing up as a teenager or something you struggled with as an adult. It could come on from being bullied, losing your job, losing a child, losing someone you loved. But for some, it can be short term. It can be something that comes on and then eventually goes away and you never experience it ever again. But for those like me, we have it all the time. It starts off from experience it week to week and then into months and then into years, which now is called major depression. And that's now something you struggle with your whole life. And you can go to a doctor and you can seek treatment and get medicine for it. But I've also learned that with taking medicine, it's not fully ever going to take the depression away. You're still going to suffer from it, but it's going to make it easier for you to function and to live with. And you can also start going to a therapist who can openly talk about what's going on. Or if you have someone in your life that you truly trust, you can openly start talking about it, which will also make it better because you're not struggling alone. Now, this is the part that I feel like is hardest for the people who have to watch the ones they love and their friends struggle with it, because you don't really completely understand what they're going through, and all you want to do is to help them stop suffering, but you can't take away their pain or how they're feeling. So if you know somebody who is struggling, I think encouraging them to openly seek help with what they're going through, or to openly talk to you and share how you're feeling, it could almost start to not completely take away the pain and the feelings that they're feeling, but almost make it easier because now they're openly talking about it, and maybe you can start helping in that way to help them feel comfortable and loved enough that they don't feel like they have to hide it from you, and it can feel a little bit easier to understand what they're going through. Now, I can share with you that I've when I first started having depression, I did that. When I would see my family, I would put a smile on my face and I would make it almost like I was okay. But on the inside, I was feeling lonely and sad, but I didn't want them to know that because I didn't want them to worry, and I didn't want them to have to reap the pain and the suffering I was going through. I just didn't want them to feel it. And I think that's how most of us feel. We know we're struggling, and we know that we are feeling sad and lonely. We just don't want you to have to feel our sadness and our loneliness, so we just feel like it's better if we don't talk about it. But I think most of us don't realize that if maybe we started talking about it with, like I said, a therapist, if you don't have someone you trust or love, or if you have that person you trust or love, then the more you talk about it and the more you can help them understand what you're going through, the more they're going to be able to help you get through it. Now, it's never going to go away. Depression is something that if you have it your whole life, you're going to struggle your whole life. But if you can find ways to cope with it to make it a little bit easier, then it's not so bad to deal with. This is part of the reason I wanted to make a platform around this and talk about it. Because obviously, with anything in life, you can go online and Google it, and right there you learn exactly what you need to know, right? Like, seriously, think about anything in your life that you've wanted to learn. You Google it and you find it out, and you know exactly how to do something or know how to go find something or know how to learn something. But for me, even doing my research, I went online and I looked stuff up, and I just felt like anybody can go on and get the concept of depression from the definition. But truly, unless you know somebody who has struggled from it or have started having symptoms yourself, you don't truly know what is going on, because the emotions and the sadness and the negative thoughts that you have is so much more than this definition. So that's why I am truly hoping that in the future I can invite people that feel comfortable enough to talk about it, talk about the depression they're going through themselves, or talk about somebody that they loved who's gone through it openly. So then we get more of a open conversation about what it is and how it feels. Because, like I said, it's different for everybody. So, how I go through it and the emotions I feel are not going to be the same as how you go through it and the emotions you feel. And it's definitely not going to be the same emotions and the feelings of somebody who has to watch somebody they love or a friend go through it. Because the feelings that are associated with it and how it makes you feel day to day and the things that you just want to do but can't do anymore are always different. But I think the main thing for everybody is that we just want to feel happy and feel better again and not suffer from the pain that we feel inside. So I feel like for those of us who suffer and know how hard it is, I don't ever realize how tough and hard it is for the people who love and care about us to hear that we're going through this. Because again, as someone who has to watch someone go through it, all you want to do is help them not feel the pain and not feel the suffering, and figure out ways you could almost take that away from them, but ultimately knowing that you can't. And you almost feel so helpless that you can't help the people that you love. So I think thinking about depression and openly talking about it is hard, because it's hard to sit down with a friend or someone that you truly love and say, I feel these ways and I have these thoughts that simply just don't go away. It's hard to tell somebody that the thoughts that you've been having would ultimately feel better if you weren't here anymore. And I think, too, along that line, it is something that telling somebody that you just don't want to be alive and them hearing it can be hard, because that's not how they feel. And I think sometimes we don't talk about what we're going through either, is because we don't want the people, like our friends and our loved ones, to know the trauma we've been through that has led to us feeling that way. So ultimately, it's not that we don't want to talk about our depression and we don't want to talk about how we're feeling because we don't want you to worry about it, but we also don't want to bring up the one thing that has led us to our suffering. For a lot of people, it's hard to look your loved one or your friend in the face and say, you didn't know, but this is what I've been hiding, or this is what I went through, and this is where it's led me. Because for one, now they know that you're suffering silently and feeling this pain and loneliness on the inside, but now they know what happened. Like if you went through abuse or being bullied, For some, it could be easy. I lost my job, it really put me down in a spiral, and I just couldn't get out of it. Or I lost a loved one, and that really put me down, and it was hard. But it gets more difficult for the ones who have been mentally or physically abused, or have gone through a trauma as a kid or in their teenage years, or even as an adult, to openly say, this is what I went through and this is why I'm here. So that's why I said, now you're like, oh my gosh, you're suffering from this mental illness, how can I help? But oh my gosh, I never knew that you went through all this trauma, and that's what led you to this, and now you're even more upset because you never knew. So that's why depression is something that's not easy to talk about, because first you have to tell them you're suffering and openly talk about that, but it's also going back and opening that vault again of the trauma you went through that led you there. And I think it's much harder on us to talk about what caused us to go in to depression and start feeling these things. For a lot of people, which is, it's very sad to even say, is that you don't almost know that somebody is suffering or what they've gone through until they've taken their own lives. And you didn't realize they were going through it, and you didn't realize that they went through this trauma or went through this thing that caused them to get there, or it's things that they don't want to talk about that make them sad until they're gone. And then you start openly talking about them to friends and family, and you start sharing things, and you start figuring out what it was and what went wrong. And then for those ones who have lost someone, now it's almost like sitting in your own thoughts of like, if I would have known, what could I have done differently? How could I have helped? And then sometimes I think that's why for people who lose someone, now they start spiraling and getting sad and going into apart and start feeling symptoms of depression, because you start beating yourself up. What could I have done? What could I have said? Only if I would have known. And this is part of it that almost is upsetting sometimes to talk about and even mention, is that the people who do reach out to somebody and they tell them, I'm struggling and I'm going through this, and they almost don't take them seriously, because there's a lot of cases where people say they're struggling or they're going through something and people just wave it off, and they're like, oh, you're fine, and no, you're not going through it. And then that person takes their life and they're like, oh, I just didn't know it was so serious. And right here, right now, I'm going to tell you, no matter what kind of mental illness, if somebody tells you outright that they're suffering, please take them seriously, because that is their way of crying out for help, because they want you to know and they want you to do something about it, and they want you to help them. They're not simply just telling you to tell you so you can wave them off and then down the line think to yourself, oh my gosh, if I just would have taken it seriously, or I didn't know they were serious about it, I could have done something. No, when you know, please do something about it before it's too late. Because it's sad enough to know that somebody's going through it, and then to lose that person, to then find out that somebody knew that they were going through it because they were told they were going through it and did nothing about it. And I think almost this is a case for a lot of kids or teenagers, is that they go to their parents and they say these things, and the parents have just so much going on, with life and other kids and work and stuff, that you're almost like overwhelmed, that you don't take them seriously, and then you don't realize it was a serious subject until you lose your child, and then you're asked questions about, did they talk about it or did they say anything, and then you start relaying all these things, and then that's when you start spiraling, as in, I should have took them seriously, or I should have talked to them about it, or what could I have done to help them. And there are a lot of cases that no matter what somebody would have done, or no matter how much they would have wanted them to seek help, there's ultimately nothing you can do for somebody who almost has spiraled so deep that they don't want your help. They don't want to feel better, that they feel ultimately that their only option is to end their life. And I personally hope that by doing this and openly talking about it and connecting with people, we can almost stop the death rate, and we can almost make it become smaller. Because I never want somebody to feel like their only option is to take their own life and not be here anymore. Because you do have people who understand and who love you and who will be there for you on the good and the bad days, who will ultimately always understand and always want the best for you. So, this is depression. Going through it and researching it was hard because there's a lot of things that I associated with, and there's a lot of things that if someone who goes through it can look it up and associate with. But there is a lot of things like I didn't know and I learned. So by doing this process, it's almost going into more of a deeper dive into what it is. Because like I said, you can go online and you can look at the definition, but that's not going to relate to you the feelings and the emotions and the things that you ultimately feel while going through and suffering from depression. And there are so many people, and to think that it's so crazy about how so many people are suffering out there, that for the people who ultimately think they're alone, you're not. Because like I said, there are 3 million people per year that openly talk to a therapist or a doctor that say, I'm suffering. So that's on record of 3 million people, not including all the ones who don't openly want to talk about it and say that they're going through it, or the ones that haven't sought treatment or help. So to almost think that, I mean, when you go through it, you really think like, nobody can be suffering the way I'm suffering. Nobody's going through what I'm going through, but they are. And it's just crazy to me to think that for those of us who suffer, we think that way. I've been there. I've been to the darkest place and thought I'm ultimately alone and no one is ever going to understand me and no one is ever going to understand what I'm going through. But when I chose to openly talk about it and chose to openly start sharing my feelings, it didn't ever go away, but it almost made it easier. So on those days when I feel that way, and I go to that person I trust and I openly talk about, this is how I'm feeling and this is the things I'm going through, then they ultimately know that either they can just sit there and listen to you go on and say nothing, or they can start helping you and give you advice on how to maybe do this or change your thoughts around. But even knowing you can just go to somebody, spill your heart out to them, and ultimately just know that they're there, even if they don't say anything. Because for those of you who know somebody who suffer, just being present, you don't even have to say anything. You can just listen to them and let them cry it out and let them get it all out. And just for that person, for them to know that there's somebody that's there listening to them is so more important than feeling like you have nobody to go to and you don't trust the doctors and you don't want to get on medicine, you don't want to go to a therapist because they don't know you and you don't think they're going to understand. But I think also on that line too is for people who decide to seek help, going to therapists going to a therapist might actually help you. Because when you don't trust somebody or have somebody in your life that you feel like will understand, if you go to a therapist, they understand what you're going through. They'll listen to you. They'll not give you negative stuff back, but they'll ultimately start helping you and giving you the things and the coping mechanisms you can do to start leading yourself in the direction you want to go. And that's why I said, I don't go to therapists, and I've never gone to a doctor and sought treatment. And I've almost thought about going to a therapist so I could share that experience with you guys, because I think being able to share things with somebody who doesn't know you and who can't automatically judge you for the things you've done in life could be helpful, because it's a clean slate. They don't know your past and they don't know anything. So being able to talk to somebody and for them to not judge you at all, but to simply be there to listen to you, could be very helpful. So the people who are struggling, who see this or hear this and feel like you're ultimately alone and haven't sought treatment, please seek treatment, because it can ultimately save your life. And for the ones who watch somebody they love or have a friend that you know is suffering, please encourage them to either openly talk about it with you, to find somebody who they know they can openly talk about with, or to seek treatment again before it's too late. Because it's when it's too late, then there's nothing we can do for that person. And there's nothing you can ultimately do for yourself when you choose that path. There is no coming back. There is just going down that path and not being alive anymore. And yes, there are people that do go down that path, and then there's enough time where they are saved and they end up in the hospital and they come back and they're alive again. And then they start seeking treatment. But we want to get in front of that and stop that before it's too late. And this is depression. I hope this episode is helpful for you, and I hope you like it. So if you find this very helpful, please sign up and follow me. If you're watching this on YouTube, click the like or subscribe for new episodes. Because this is really what I am passionate about. And like I said, any mental illness or subject is not easy to talk about, but I want to talk about it. I want to make it easier for people to feel like they can openly talk about any mental illness and discuss it with people and figure things out. Because it's important to not feel like you always have to hide. And it's important to feel like you can ultimately every day be yourself openly and 100% without hiding any struggle you're going through. So I want to end always with that you don't have to struggle alone, and that I love you.